I'm going to now move into all things action planning, kind of talking about what adaptation actions are, the different types of actions that exist, walking through a few examples of that, and examples of adaptation actions as it pertains to that list of impacts, those prioritized impacts that I just mentioned. And then we'll move into the instructions for the activity today. And so the purpose of all of this is for us to answer kind of two main questions. The first being, where is it that we want to go? What is our goal to address these impacts? What is our overall sort of vision and our goals and our objectives for this plan? And question number two is kind of how do we get there? What are the strategies, the plans, programs, policies, and actions that we need to take to get there? And so I just want to stress and emphasize the importance of the fact that this plan is made for and by the community. And so we really want everyone here to feel like they have ownership over this plan. And that's why we have this process of gathering feedback on actions and objectives now, and doing this first before we even take it to kind of staff, is to just establish, well, what is the community saying? What is most important? And so having that shared vision that we establish in our breakouts and shared ideas of what actions are great solutions to these impacts is so important. And not only now, but also that lens, for you to add that lens now, is important because later on during implementation, there will certainly be actions that only the city will implement and that will be responsible for it, but there will be tons of actions that will need support from your community organizations, the community in general, individuals. And so having that conversation now and keeping you involved and feeling like you have ownership over this plan is really important to us. So I just want to kind of stress that early on. So with that being said, here's an idea of how these impacts move into objectives and actions. So you saw that list of sort of 7 prioritized impacts. So those risks, what we're calling risks now. And so what happens is obviously sometimes the impacts kind of address the same kind of climatic stressors. So what we do is we group a couple of the impacts that sound a bit similar or have a sort of a similar overall impact, and we group it together into a statement. And then we kind of go from there and we establish those objectives. So we think about our future desired state, kind of thinking ahead 5 years into the future, the plan successful, what have we, what is an objective, or what is a goal that makes that plan successful. And then we work kind of backwards of, okay, if we've established these goals and objectives, what are the actions that we can take to achieve those, and what are the actions we can take to get there. And so these actions, as much as possible, should be measurable but realistic. We really want them to kind of build upon any previous work, so work that's been done by the city or work being done in the community already. And so you really provide that lens as well. And so can be also, like I said, implemented by the city, by community organizations, partners, and individuals as well. So these are the sort of basic kind of types of actions that can exist under the adaptation action umbrella. There's some examples listed out here. So these adaptation actions need to address those risks first and foremost. And they need to work on improving adaptive capacity, so our ability to cope and respond to those climate change impacts, as well as sort of avoid them in the first place. And so this can look like modifying plans, policies, procedures, and standards. So whether that's looking at bylaws, development plans, operating practices, codes, things like that. We can also look at kind of building new or upgrading existing gray or green infrastructure. So whether that's kind of looking at things like low impact development and how to integrate that into existing assets, homes and retrofits, things like that, expanding stormwater collection, all of those pieces. There's certainly a really, really key step here in working on actions or developing actions that are addressing kind of improving awareness and education. So whether that's stuff like a flood preparedness campaign or awareness campaign with developers, with homeowners, right? So we want to work on a good subset of these actions as well, because they work on really generating support for adaptation efforts at large. And they kind of encourage that voluntary and individual effort as well, right? Around that lot level flood risk reduction, energy conservation, water conservation, things like that. We also want to work on varying or diversifying existing actions, right? So that there are things that are already being done at the city, within the community, whether they're labeled as adaptation or not, they address climate change adaptation in some way. And so kind of building upon that is really, really important for us as well. So if there's tree planting programs happening already, diversifying those plantings and looking at that in that way to address erosion concerns or urban heat island, or invasive species, whatever the concern is important, or looking at business continuity planning as a thing that needs to be done. And I think it's also important to remember to consider unknown. So there's definitely things that we do not know about the state of our assets or the state of our environment or the state of kind of social systems. And so there's things that may need to be done before you get to the action, right? Kind of as a sub-action or a pre-action before you get there. So maybe you need to do a tree canopy study before knowing how it needs to be resilient. So we're really trying not to reinvent the wheel here. We want to know what's already happening that's in the city, what's happening in the community, and what we can do to build on that. And then, of course, obviously brainstorm new actions to kind of supplement that as well. So as part of that, Ickley and Hamilton worked on conducting a bit of a best practice review of adaptation actions kind of around North America, specifically in Canada, but a few areas in the United States as well. So there's some examples of communities that we looked at. And so we looked at adaptation plans, we looked at policy documents, individual actions. We looked at what we could find that would kind of best correspond to some of the impacts and threats to Hamilton. And so I'm going to present on some of them now as they correspond to that list of 5 to 7 impacts that I just presented on, just as a way to start thinking about some of those actions. Keep in mind, these are best practices, so they'll sound really fulsome and great, but that's because they are a bit of a wish list. They're a bit more ambitious. So if you like something that you see here and you want to bring it up in your breakout group, try to remember it, and we can either keep it as is, or we can work together to tweak it as well. And then also, like I said, work on brainstorming new actions as well. Just looking at time. Yep, we're doing okay. And so I want to walk through just a couple best practice examples for each of those impacts that we talked about. So that first impact is around the vector-borne diseases piece and more incidences of that as a result of increased temperatures and precipitation. So an example of a best practice could be to coordinate or do have better coordination between the city, conservation authorities, and any other partners to implement a monitoring program to kind of track the varying levels and degrees of these threats brought on by vector-borne diseases. You'll see in the little second column, that's where the action was either adapted or taken from. So this was from Caledon. The next one is around that piece of more extreme heat or heat waves, and that kind of posing health and safety concerns for vulnerable populations, for those who don't have access to air conditioning, things like that. So a couple examples of best practices or things that can be done: increase the amount of green space, right? Like work on more vegetation and trees and shading to combat a bit of that heat island effect. And then also maybe making sure that if people are experiencing those impacts, to develop support networks for vulnerable populations. So for seniors, youth, and people experiencing homelessness, whether that's a registry, whether that is, a list of contact information, listings of social service providers, all of that, making sure that's updated. Those are some ideas of things we can do. Another impact is that of extreme rainfall and more instances of flooding on public and private properties. So in terms of something the city can look at is upsizing their stormwater infrastructure whenever renewal is happening, where that's possible. Maybe another idea could be to develop or implement some sort of sustainable financing option or bylaw or financing option to incentivize that lot level stormwater retention and to encourage that individual uptake and discourage kind of those impervious surfaces that don't retain that water and kind of contribute to a lot of runoff. And then we have that impact around more ice storms leading to, again, the same health and safety concerns around hazardous roads, pathways, and sidewalks. So when that happens, when these extreme weather events are happening, making sure that there are more designated and accessible areas of refuge, maybe establishing or thinking about the feasibility of implementing these outside of working hours, expanding the use of these, so community centers, libraries, places of worship, all of that. And then as well, kind of on the city side of things, maybe we can work on assessing training needs for staff. So as a response to kind of all extreme weather, right? So not just ice storms, but extreme weather in general. And then a final example is that impact, that grouped impact on kind of concerns related to agriculture that we saw. So the droughts leading to a decreased availability and higher prices of foods, lowered water supply, and decreased financial viability of local farms. And so maybe to address that water supply piece, where we're working towards an integrated watershed management plan to improve the health and the resilience of watersheds in general. And then on the maybe addressing some of the food insecurity components of that, there were actually some great suggestions provided by some of the conversations that you folks had with Andrea. So there were lots of ideas about expanding community gardens, food waste redistribution programs, and things to that effect. And then finally, just around actions, I just want to highlight that there is a really big importance for actions that embed climate action into planning, right? We want to make sure that climate action or climate adaptation is mainstreamed into sort of our everyday processes and long-term planning. And so climate threats are changing every few years, and that's why it's important to have that iterative process where you're always monitoring, reviewing, and redoing things. But you're going to need processes within the plan now and embedded within your organization or within the city now to make sure that that's the case. It's adaptation shouldn't be a one-off activity, but again, just build that capacity and year after year. And so it's an iterative process where you're learning, tweaking, and reapplying or those actions. So some examples of what enabling actions could look like are here. You could develop and implement a climate change education and training program for staff, for community members, for elected officials, kind of assigning that climate champion across organizations, so that person who can be a bit of a figurehead and get people to the table to have that conversation, making sure that we're always reviewing emerging climate research trends once a year, every 6 months, whatever that might be, as well as developing and maintaining a database of climate funding, programming, opportunities that exist that we can kind of take advantage of and continue kind of planning and adjusting to climate change. So that's my spiel on all things adaptation planning. Now I'm just going to do a bit of a quick run through on what we're doing for our activity today, and then we'll go into our breakouts. Just keeping an eye on time. I think we are good. So the activity is called Now, Wow, How, which is an activity that's focused on, like I said, we're going to identify some of those high-level objectives for the future and then work towards how we're going to achieve them and what those actions are. So the now that you see in that little target is what we're concerned about right now, the risk, right? And so we're going to be looking at the risk, and then we'll move into, well, wow, what is the objective 5 years from now, 10 years from now that we've addressed this? It's a stretch goal. What do we want, this to look like? And then when we work our way backwards of, well, how are we going to achieve this? And so what we want to mimic is, if we were in a workshop together, we would have a giant sort of target type of figure on the table, and we'd have tons of sticky notes, and it would be really collaborative. And we want to try to mimic that as much as possible. And so we're using a platform called Miro. It's an online whiteboard type of application, and we'll try to mimic that as much as possible. Maybe some of you have used it before, some of you haven't, but we will run through the instructions. And once we're in the breakout, we'll give you some time to acclimate to the board as well. So don't worry about it. It is quite simple, but there are just a few things to keep in mind as you navigate it. We'll go into 4 breakout rooms. So one group will stay with me, Hiba, and the other 3 will be facilitated by my colleagues, Chris, Rena, and Jenny. Each of these groups, what we're going to do, we have about an hour for the activity. And like I said, we have that list of prioritized impacts to get through. You may remember I mentioned that we group some impacts together when we try to address and brainstorm actions. And so that's what's happening is we've taken that list of 7 and we've started to group them. And so we're going to address 4 to 5 scenarios or those now statements within the group. And they do address all those 7 impacts, but they're just grouped into those 4 statements, those 4 now statements. And then there's kind of stickies on the Miro whiteboard that all you have to do is double click and type into it. And it's as simple as that. Like I said, we'll start with the now, we'll work our way into wow, imagining possible futures and what your objectives are. And then, like I said, work backwards into the how circle of how you're going to do that. And then just a little reminder, this is just for you to read now to just kind of remember the types of actions that we can come up with together. They're actions that the city can take, that community stakeholders can take, that individuals can take, and can be implemented by all 3 as well. And they can kind of look like these different elements on the screen. So before we go into the actual breakouts where you'll access the whiteboard that kind of looks like this through your browser, I just wanted to provide a bit of a screenshot and walk you through what you're seeing on the screen. So you'll see that it looks like that target that you just saw in the slides before. What we'll do when we get to the breakouts is we'll give you the link. All you'll have to do is click on it, type in your name to enter, and you'll see this board. You're going to see 4 to 5 of these targets along the screen. So there'll be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And so we'll work through them one at a time. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes on each. And so the way to kind of navigate that or contribute to the board and some of those empty stickies that you might see right here is there's just probably 3 or 4 points that I want you to keep in mind. And again, we'll run through them in the group. The first thing you'll want to do is when you get to this board, you'll want to look to your left along this little vertical bar, and you see this little cursor icon. The first thing you want to do is click that and make sure it's blue. That just means that you'll be able to navigate the board, and you'll just have to click, drag up, down, left, right, and you'll be able to move along the board from the first target to the next target. The next thing you'll want to keep in mind is how to zoom in and out, right? There'll be times where you'll want to zoom out to see, what's happening and to move to the next target. And there's times where you want to zoom in and read what's on the board, read the instructions, read what's been written on the sticky notes. And so to do that, you would draw your attention to the bottom right corner where you see this little percentage sign and a plus and a minus button. You would just click these, plus to zoom in, minus to zoom out, and you'll zoom in and out quite easy. Just have a little checklist here to make sure that everybody understands. Oh yes, there's also a little map icon in the bottom right here. It looks like a little foldable map. And it really is that. It's a map. It shows you, if you look at it, I know it's a little hard to see on your screen, it shows you what the whole board looks like. And so that's a good way to see kind of where you are on the page if you feel like you're lost and you scroll too far up or too far down. And so that's to see where you are, and you can also pull it up and down to move across the board. And then as for the sticky notes, what we've done is we've locked all these elements in place. So you won't accidentally delete the now, you won't accidentally delete any of these things. All we'll ask you to do is when we read the now statement and then we go to wow, and I want you to populate kind of your ideas in there, you'll just have to double click these and start writing. And you can write as much as you like because the text will auto adjust to fit the sticky note. So you don't have to worry that it's spilling out of it. And that's all you'll have to do. If for whatever reason we've populated all of these and we need more stickies, there's some extras on the side that you'll just click, drag, and drop. It's very simple, but most probably you won't need to do that. And then just a note for anybody who may be on an iPad or a tablet, I'm hoping that most people are on a laptop or a desktop. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, anything I've said now applies. But if you're on an iPad or a tablet, the navigation and the zoom functions might look a tiny bit different in that you'll just have to use your fingers, obviously, to zoom in and out and move up and down. And that your keyboard may take up a large part of the screen. And so to just minimize your keyboard when you're not typing so you can see what's happening on the screen.